During the mandatory company barbecue, I plugged a USB drive into my boss's smart TV and made everyone speechless. A few months ago, my wife Lauren started acting really paranoid. She told me she thought someone was watching our house. She said she would hear footsteps on the porch while I was at work, and sometimes she would find the gate to our backyard left open. Then she started blaming our neighbor, a retired guy named Arthur who lives across the street. She said Arthur was always staring at her when she checked the mail and that he made her feel incredibly unsafe. She begged me to go yell at him, but I told her we needed proof before accusing an old man of stalking. I told her I was going to buy a Ring doorbell and put security cameras around the perimeter of the house. Lauren completely freaked out. She said she read articles about hackers tapping into home security systems and watching people. She was literally crying, saying she would feel even more violated if we had cameras pointing at our front door. She insisted we just get stronger deadbolts and heavy curtains instead. I thought her reaction was weird, but she was genuinely distressed, so I compromised. I installed the deadbolts, but without telling her, I also bought a small motion-activated trail camera from a hunting store. I strapped it high up in the oak tree in our front yard, hidden by the leaves pointing directly at our driveway and front porch. I let the camera run for 3 days while I worked my shifts. On Thursday morning, I came home, made some coffee, and pulled the SD card from the camera to check the footage on my laptop. I expected to see Arthur wandering around or maybe some neighborhood kids messing with our gate. Instead, I saw a silver Mercedes pull into our driveway at 11:30 at night. A man got out of the car. It was not Arthur, the retired neighbor. It was David, the regional director of the manufacturing plant where I work. He is technically my boss. I watched the video in total shock as David walked up to my front porch. He did not knock. Lauren opened the door before he even reached the top step. She was wearing a silk robe I bought her for our anniversary. She threw her arms around his neck and kissed him right there on the porch before pulling him inside. The camera caught David leaving at 4 in the morning, just 2 hours before I usually get home. I sat in my kitchen staring at the screen while my coffee went completely cold. I realized instantly why she invented the stalker story. Arthur must have seen David sneaking around our house late at night. Lauren was terrified Arthur would casually mention seeing a strange man at our place, so she planted the idea that Arthur was a creepy stalker. That way, if Arthur ever tried to talk to me, I would immediately dismiss him as a crazy old man obsessed with my wife. I felt a level of anger I did not even know was possible, but I forced myself to stay completely calm. I put the SD card in my pocket and went to sleep like nothing happened. I needed a plan because David is my boss, and he has the power to fire me. David is married to a wealthy woman named Claire, whose family basically funded his entire career. They host a massive company barbecue at their estate every summer, and it is mandatory if you want to stay on David's good side. The barbecue was scheduled for this past Saturday. I told Lauren we were going, and I made sure she wore a nice dress. She complained the whole car ride there, saying she hated company events, but I just smiled and gripped the steering wheel. When we arrived, the backyard was packed with my coworkers and upper management. David was standing by the pool holding a beer and playing the perfect host. Claire was greeting everyone with a fake smile. I walked right past the buffet tables and went straight to the outdoor entertainment system David had set up for music. I plugged a small USB drive directly into the smart TV. I grabbed the microphone they were using for announcements. I tapped it twice, and the whole yard went quiet. Everyone turned to look at me, including Lauren and David. I smiled and said I wanted to give a quick presentation about workplace safety and the importance of knowing who is entering your property. I hit play on the remote. The massive 70-inch screen lit up with the crisp night vision footage from my trail cam. There was David, in high definition, walking up to my door and making out with my wife in her silk robe. The timestamp clearly showed 11:30 on a Tuesday night. The silence in that backyard was deafening. You could hear the pool filter running. Claire dropped her wine glass on the stone patio, and it shattered. David turned completely white and tried to lunge for the TV, but he tripped over a deck chair. Lauren let out this horrifying scream and covered her face with her hands. My coworkers were staring at the screen with their mouths hanging open. I set the microphone down gently on a table. I looked at Lauren, who was sobbing and trying to hide behind a patio umbrella. I walked over to Claire and handed her a printed copy of the screenshots I took from the video. I told Claire I was really sorry she had to find out this way, but I figured she deserved to know where her husband goes on his late-night business calls. I walked out the side gate without looking back. I drove home, packed my bags, and moved into a long-term stay hotel. David was fired on Monday morning after Claire threatened to pull all her family investments from the company. Lauren has been sending me essays via text about how it meant nothing, and she was just feeling lonely because of my night shifts. I have not replied to a single one. Tomorrow I am changing my shift to days and meeting with the best divorce lawyer in the city. The hotel room smelled like stale cigarettes and lemon-scented industrial cleaner. I sat on the edge of the bed for 3 hours, just watching the neon sign of a nearby diner flicker on and off. My phone was vibrating so much it eventually vibrated itself off the nightstand. I didn't pick it up. I knew it was Lauren. I knew it was her mother. I knew it was probably HR from the plant, or maybe even David trying to threaten me. I didn't care. I kept thinking about Arthur. I felt like a total piece of trash for how I'd looked at him over the last month. Every time I saw him mowing his lawn or getting his mail, I'd felt this spark of heat in my chest, thinking he was some predator leering at my wife. I'd actually stood in my living room, peering through the blinds, wondering if I should go over there and break his jaw. And all the while, he was just a guy living his life who had the misfortune of seeing a silver Mercedes where it shouldn't be. On Sunday morning, I drove back to the neighborhood. I didn't go to my house. I pulled into Arthur's driveway. He was out there in a plaid shirt, watering some marigolds. He looked up, his face tightening like he expected me to start screaming at him again. I got out of the car and walked straight up to him. I didn't say hello. I just said, "Arthur, I'm an idiot. I'm sorry. You were right, and I was wrong. And I'm sorry for every look I ever gave you." He looked at me for a long time. He turned off the hose. "She told you I was the one, didn't she?" he asked. His voice was scratchy but steady. "Yeah," I said. "She did. I saw that car 4 times in 2 weeks, son," Arthur said, wiping his hands on his jeans. I didn't want to be the one to break up a home, but I also didn't like the way she looked at me when she realized I knew. She has a mean streak when she's cornered. We talked for 20 minutes. He told me he'd seen David leave at dawn more than once. He'd even seen them laughing on the porch like it was their house, not mine. Hearing it from a third party made the anger come back, but it was a cold anger now, stable. I went back to the hotel and finally opened my phone. 64 missed calls, over 100 texts. Lauren's messages followed a predictable, pathetic arc. At 6 p.m. Saturday, it was, "How could you do that to me in front of everyone? You're a monster." By 10 p.m., it shifted to, "I was so lonely. You're never here. The night shifts killed us. Please come home so we can talk." By 2 a.m., it was back to, "David is going to sue you for everything you have. You're going to be homeless." I scrolled past all of it and found a message from an unknown number. It was Claire. "I have a meeting with my father's legal team at 9 a.m. Monday. It read, "If you have more footage or timestamps, I want them. I'm making sure he leaves this marriage with nothing but the clothes he wore to the barbecue. Also, Also, don't worry about your job. He won't be there to fire you. I spent the rest of Sunday afternoon downloading every single clip from that trail camera onto a cloud drive and sent the link to Claire. I didn't ask for anything in return. Seeing David trip over that deck chair in front of the entire regional management team was payment enough, but knowing Claire was going to bleed him dry in court was the cherry on top. Monday morning, I went to the plant. I expected a scene, but the atmosphere was weirdly quiet. People avoided my eyes, but in a respectful way, not a judgmental one. About an hour into my shift, the plant manager, a guy named Rick who usually didn't talk to anyone below supervisor level, walked up to my station. "David's gone," Rick said. "No, hello. No, how are you? Just the facts." Security escorted him out at 8. The board is terminating his contract for conduct unbecoming and a dozen other HR violations Claire's lawyers flagged this morning. He looked at me, then at the floor. "And hey, sorry about the mess. You're a good worker. If you need a week of PTO to get your head straight, it's approved. Don't even worry about the paperwork." I thanked him but told him I'd rather work. I needed the distraction. When I got off work that afternoon, I finally drove to the house. I had a locksmith meeting me there. Lauren's car wasn't in the driveway, but I could see her through the front window. She was sitting on the sofa, surrounded by tissues. When I walked in, she jumped up. She looked like a wreck mascara smeared, hair unwashed. "You're home," she breathed, moving toward me like she was going to hug me. I held up a hand. "The locksmith is 5 minutes away. You have until he finishes changing the deadbolts to get whatever fits in your car. I've already filed the initial paperwork. This house is in my name, bought with my inheritance, and the post-nup we signed says, 'Infidelity forfeits your claim to the equity.'" She froze. The Lonely Wife Act evaporated instantly. Her face went sharp. "You think you can just kick me out? I live here. I have rights." "You had rights to my trust and my loyalty," I said. I felt nothing. No heartbeat in my ears, no shaking hands, just a flat, dead calm. "You traded those for a guy who couldn't even stay upright when he got caught. David isn't coming to save you, Lauren. Claire is taking the house, the cars, and his dignity. He's currently staying at a Motel 6. She started screaming then, screaming about how I was a boring factory drone and how David made her feel alive. I just stood there and checked my watch. The locksmith arrived. He was a big guy with a toolbox and a look on his face that suggested he'd seen this exact scenario 1,000 times before. He didn't say a word. He just started unscrewing the hardware on the front door. I went into the bedroom and grabbed a suitcase. I started throwing her clothes into it, not neatly, just armfuls of silk and denim. I dragged them to the front porch. "Get out," I said. She looked at the locksmith, then at me, then at the pile of her clothes on the porch. She realized I wasn't going to budge. There was no more manipulation left. She grabbed her purse, snatched her car keys off the counter, and walked out. "I hate you," she hissed as she passed me. "I don't think about you at all," I said. It was a lie, but it felt good to say. I watched her silver SUV pull out of the driveway. Across the street, Arthur was sitting on his porch in a rocking chair. He didn't wave. He just nodded once. I nodded back. I went inside and closed the door. The house was quiet. For the first time in months, it didn't feel like there were secrets hiding in the corners. I sat down at the kitchen table and pulled out the business card for the divorce lawyer I'd called. I looked at the trail camera still hidden in the oak tree through the window. I'd have to take it down eventually. But for tonight, I just wanted to sit in the silence and drink a beer that hadn't been bought by David's money. The paperwork for the divorce was finalized 3 months later. It was surprisingly fast once Claire's lawyers got involved on my behalf as material witnesses for their own case. David ended up losing everything. The last I heard, he was working a mid-level sales job 3 states over, living in a 1-bedroom apartment and paying Claire a massive settlement every month. Lauren tried to sue for alimony, but the video was a pretty hard hurdle to clear. She's living with her mother now. She still texts me sometimes from different numbers, usually late at night, asking if I ever really loved her. I never answered. I kept the night shifts for a while. I liked the quiet of the plant at 3 a.m., but eventually, I moved to the day shift. I wanted to see the sun. I wanted to be able to sit on my porch in the evenings and talk to Arthur. We're actually friends now. He's a grumpy old guy, but he's honest. And in my experience, honesty is a lot harder to find than a silver Mercedes in a driveway. I still have the USB drive. It's in my safe. I don't watch it anymore. I don't need to. The memory of the look on David's face when that screen flickered to life is burned into my brain. It's the best thing I've ever seen. The house feels like mine again. No heavy curtains, no extra deadbolts. Just a regular house with a regular guy inside who finally learned that the things you're most afraid of seeing are usually the things you need to see the most. The first thing I did after the divorce papers were stamped was buy a new rug for the living room. It sounds like a small thing, but the old one was a Persian style that Lauren had picked out with David's refined taste in mind. I threw it in the dumpster behind the plant. The new one is just a thick slate gray shag from a local warehouse. It doesn't mean anything, and that's exactly why I like it. Work at the plant changed. With David gone and the board scrambling to fix the PR nightmare of a regional director being outed as a homewrecker at a company function, things actually got better for the guys on the floor. The new guy they brought in, a guy named Marcus, is a straight shooter. He doesn't hold mandatory barbecues. He holds production meetings where he actually listens. About 6 months after the barbecue, I was finishing up a day shift when I saw a familiar car parked at the far end of the employee lot. It wasn't the silver Mercedes that had been seized or sold during David's fire sale. It was a beat-up white sedan. Lauren was leaning against the door, waiting for me. I didn't feel the surge of adrenaline I expected. I didn't feel the heart-pounding rage or the hollow ache in my gut. I just felt tired. "What are you doing here, Lauren?" I asked, stopping about 10 feet away. I kept my lunchbox in my hand like a shield. "I saw your car," she said. She looked older. The expensive highlights were gone, replaced by her natural mousy brown, and the silk robe glow had been replaced by the weary look of someone working retail hours at a mall. I just wanted to say, "I'm sorry." For real this time. Not because I got caught, just because I realized how much I threw away. I looked at her. I looked at the way she was twisting her wedding ring finger. The skin there was still slightly indented, even though the diamond was long gone, probably sitting in a pawn shop window or at the bottom of a lake. "You didn't throw it away," I said quietly. "You traded it. You made a calculation that David was a step up, and you were wrong. That's not a mistake, Lauren. That's a choice." "I'm living with my mom," she whispered, her eyes welling up. "She treats me like a child. I have nothing. You have your life," I said, which is more than a lot of people get after they burn everything down. "Go home, Lauren. Don't come to my job again." I walked to my truck, got in, and drove away. I didn't look in the rearview mirror until I was 3 miles down the road. When I finally did, the white car was gone. The real wind didn't come from the lawyer or the house or the job, though. It came on a Tuesday night in November. It was raining, one of those cold, needle-like rains that makes you want to lock every door and stay under the covers. I was sitting in my kitchen, eating a sandwich and reading a book, when I heard a faint thud on my porch. A year ago, that sound would have sent me into a spiral of suspicion. I would have reached for the trail cam footage. I would have wondered which lie Lauren was telling me. I walked to the door and opened it. Arthur was standing there, holding a plastic container under a large umbrella. "My daughter made too much beef stew," he grunted, shoving the container toward me. "I can't eat it all before it goes south. Thought you might want some." I took the container. It was warm against my palms. Thanks, Arthur. You want to come in for a beer? He hesitated, looking at the rain, then at the warm yellow light of my kitchen. Just one. I've got a show at 8. He came in, kicked his boots off by the door, and sat at the table I'd once sat at while watching my life fall apart on a laptop screen. We didn't talk about Lauren. We didn't talk about David. We talked about the local high school football team and the price of heating oil. As he was leaving, Arthur paused at the door. He looked up at the oak tree, the leaves mostly gone now, leaving the branches bare against the streetlights. You ever take that camera down? He asked. Nah, I said, looking up at the spot where the little black box was still strapped to the trunk. I think I'll leave it, not to watch anyone, just as a reminder. A reminder of what? That the truth doesn't need a loud voice to win, I said. It just needs to be recorded. Arthur chuckled, a dry, raspy sound. Well, just don't record me taking out my trash in my boxers. Nobody needs to see that. I laughed a real, genuine laugh that started in my chest and felt like it cleared out the last of the smoke from that summer. I locked the door, not because I was afraid, but because I was done for the day. I turned off the lights and went to sleep, and for the first time in a very long time, I didn't dream about the silver Mercedes at all. The dust didn't just settle, it petrified. By the 1-year anniversary of the barbecue, the silver Mercedes incident had become a ghost story at the plant, the kind of thing the old-timers whispered to the new hires during smoke breaks. I became the guy you didn't mess with, not because I was a tough guy, but because everyone knew I was the guy who could wait. I had patience. That's what scared them. I started spending my Saturdays at the local animal shelter. It was Arthur's idea. He told me I spent too much time staring at the walls of my slate gray life. I ended up bringing home a senior beagle named Barnaby. He's slow, he's a bit deaf, and he spends most of his time sleeping on that new shag rug. He doesn't ask for anything but a walk and a bowl of kibble. It's the most honest relationship I've had in a decade. About 14 months after the divorce, I got an email. It wasn't from a lawyer or a debt collector. It was from Claire. Heading to the coast for the summer, the email read, "Found a box of things in the attic that belong to you. Tools, some old photos, a jacket with your name on the pocket. I left it with the concierge at the downtown Marriott under your name. Take care of yourself." I drove down that evening. The box was heavy, taped shut with industrial packing tape. I took it home and sat on the floor with Barnaby, cutting the tape with a pocket knife. Inside were the remnants of the life I thought I was building. A set of high-end wrenches I'd left in David's garage during one of those team-building weekend projects he used to guilt us into. A photo of me and Lauren from a New Year's party 5 years ago. I looked at my face in the photo. I looked younger, sure, but I also looked blind. I had that soft, comfortable expression of a man who thinks his floor is solid. I touched the glossy paper, then I put the photo face down on the table. At the bottom of the box was a small, handwritten note on heavy stationery. "He's trying to file for bankruptcy to avoid the last of the settlement payments," Claire had written. "My father is making sure the judge sees his hidden offshore account first. I thought you'd like to know that even when he thinks he's winning, he's losing. Hope the house is quiet." I tucked the note into my pocket. It felt like a final handoff from a teammate. The next Monday, a new girl started in the shipping department. Her name was Sarah. She was tall, had grease under her fingernails, and didn't take any crap from the guys on the loading dock. We ended up at the same coffee machine around 10 a.m. "You're the guy, right?" she asked, not looking up as she poured her sugar. "The USB guy?" I sighed, bracing for the usual questions. "That's me." She finally looked at me and grinned. It wasn't a pitying look or a gossipy one. It was a look of genuine approval. "Nice work," she said. "Most people just take the hit and cry about it. I like your style." She walked away before I could say anything, but I caught myself smiling as I walked back to my station. It was the first time I'd thought about the barbecue without feeling that cold, sharp edge in my ribs. I finally climbed the oak tree that weekend. I had a ladder this time and a pair of wire cutters. I reached up into the thick, dark leaves and unclipped the trail camera. It was covered in dust and a bit of spider web. I climbed down and sat on my porch steps, turning the little plastic box over in my hands. I didn't need the reminder anymore. I knew the truth didn't need a loud voice. I knew that silence was the best weapon I had, and I knew that Arthur was probably watching me from across the street, wondering if I was finally going to stop living in the past. I walked over to the trash can at the side of the house and dropped the camera in. The clunk it made as it hit the bottom was incredibly satisfying. I went back inside, grabbed Barnaby's leash, and whistled. We walked down the driveway, past the spot where the silver Mercedes used to park, and headed toward the park. The sun was setting, casting long orange shadows across the pavement. My house was behind me, the lights were off, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't worried about who was coming through the door. I was just a guy taking his dog for a walk, and that was more than enough. Life at the plant stabilized into a rhythm that actually felt like a career rather than a sentence. Sarah, the girl from shipping, started stopping by my station more often. It wasn't anything dramatic, no grand gestures or heavy flirting, just a, "Hey, we're short on pallets," or "Did you hear the supervisor tried to back the forklift into the break room?" One Friday, after a particularly grueling 10-hour shift, she leaned against the railing near the exit and asked if I knew a place that served a decent burger. We ended up at a dive bar 3 miles from the plant. It was the kind of place where the floor was sticky and the lighting was dim enough that nobody cared who you were. We didn't talk about my ex or the barbecue. We talked about how she used to fix tractors on her dad's farm and how I actually liked the smell of the shop floor. "You've got this look," she said, midway through a plate of fries. "What look?" "Like you're waiting for a building to fall on you," she said, direct as a heartbeat. "Relax, the sky is staying up tonight." I realized I'd been bracing myself for a year. Even after the divorce, even after the move, I was still waiting for the other shoe to drop. I was waiting for Lauren to show up with a lawyer, or David to find some way to sue me for emotional distress. But as I looked at Sarah, who was more interested in her beer than my baggage, the tension finally started to leak out of my shoulders. A few weeks later, I got a registered letter in the mail. My heart did that familiar skip thud, but it wasn't a summons. It was a check from a class action settlement involving the manufacturing plant's previous ownership, the one David had been part of. It wasn't a fortune, maybe $8,000 after taxes, but it felt like the universe handing me back the interest on the time I'd wasted. I didn't buy a new car. I didn't go on a vacation. I walked across the street to Arthur's house. He was on his porch, as usual, trying to fix a handheld radio that looked like it was from the Korean War. "Arthur," I said, leaning against his porch railing, "how much is that roof repair you were complaining about last month?" He squinted at me, his bushy eyebrows knitting together. "Why do you care? You planning on climbing up there and doing it yourself? You'll break your neck." "I'm paying for it," I said. He started to argue, his face reddening, but I held up a hand. "You saw what was happening when I was too blind to see it. You took the heat for it when I was being an asshole. Think of it as a finder's fee for the truth." He went quiet. He looked at the radio, then at his shingles, then back at me. "I don't need charity, son." "It's not charity," I said. "It's a debt. Let me pay it." He didn't say thank you, that wasn't his style, but 2 days later, a roofing crew showed up at his place. He sat in his rocking chair the whole time, watching them like a hawk to make sure they didn't miss a single nail. When they finished, he brought over a bottle of expensive bourbon, the real stuff, not the rot gut he usually drank. We sat on my porch and finished half of it while Barnaby snoozed at our feet. The final final piece of the old life fell away on a Tuesday afternoon. I was at the grocery store, grabbing a gallon of milk when I saw her, Lauren. She was at the checkout 2 lanes over. She didn't see me at first. She was arguing with the cashier about a coupon that had expired. Her voice was shrill, that same pitch she used to use when she was gaslighting me about the stalker. I watched her for a second. I didn't feel hate. I didn't feel the need to go over there and gloat about how well I was doing. I just felt a profound sense of relief that she wasn't my problem anymore. She looked exhausted, her movements frantic and small. When she finally turned and saw me, she froze. The color drained out of her face. I didn't turn away. I didn't glare. I just gave her a small, polite nod, the kind you give a stranger you recognize from a bus stop, and went back to paying for my milk. She stood there for a long beat, then practically ran out the sliding glass doors. I walked out a few minutes later and saw her sitting in her car, her head resting on the steering wheel. I kept walking. I got into my truck, turned on the radio, and drove home. That night, Sarah came over. We sat in the backyard, the one where I'd once hidden a trail camera in an oak tree. We'd set up a small fire pit, and the smoke smelled like cedar and autumn. Barnaby was trying to entice her into throwing a tennis ball he'd found under the porch. "This is a good spot," Sarah said, leaning her head on my shoulder. "It is now," I said. I looked up at the oak tree. The branches were thick and strong, reaching out over the house. There were no cameras in the leaves, no secrets in the house, no lies in the air. I reached out and took Sarah's hand. Her skin was rough, a little calloused from work, and it felt more real than anything I'd ever known. The silence wasn't deafening anymore. It was just quiet, and for the first time in my life, I knew exactly who was supposed to be on my porch. The peace I'd built started to feel permanent, which was a terrifying and beautiful thing all at once. By the second year after the barbecue, I wasn't the guy who got cheated on anymore. I was just Joe from assembly, a guy who worked hard, had a decent dog, and was seen at the local diner every Sunday morning with Sarah. The plant underwent a massive restructuring. Claire's father's firm ended up buying a majority stake in the facility, which felt like a final, cosmic closing of the loop. They promoted me to floor lead. It came with a raise and a desk in a glass-walled office, but I still spent most of my time out with the guys. I knew what it felt like to be a number on a spreadsheet, and I wasn't going to let that happen to my crew. One rainy Tuesday, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I usually ignored them, but something made me pick up. Is this him?" a man's voice asked. It sounded thin, reedy, and completely broken. It was David. I sat down at my desk and watched the rain streak against the glass. "What do you want, David?" "I'm in a bad way," he stammered. I could hear the sound of a TV in the background, some game show at high volume. Claire's lawyers. They took everything. I'm living in a studio apartment above a laundromat. I can't get a management job anywhere. Every time they run a background check, that video or some version of the story pops up. I'm blacklisted. I didn't say anything. I just listened to him breathe. "I just wanted to ask," he continued, his voice cracking. "If you could call someone, tell them it was a personal matter. Tell them I'm a good director. I'm going under, man. I'm literally losing everything." I thought about the night I saw him pull into my driveway. I thought about the silk robe I'd worked overtime to buy Lauren, and how he touched it like he owned it. I thought about the months of gaslighting, the way they'd tried to make me feel like I was losing my mind, and the way they'd used a lonely old man like Arthur as a shield for their filth. "You're right, David," I said, my voice as flat as a sheet of cold steel. "It was a personal matter, and personally, I think you're exactly where you're supposed to be. Don't call me again." I hung up. I didn't feel a rush of spite. I just felt the click of a lock. That was the last piece of him I ever had to deal with. A month later, Arthur's health started to dip. He wasn't on the porch as much. The marigolds started to wilt. I started going over there every morning before work to check on him. I'd bring him coffee and a paper, and Barnaby would sit by his recliner and let the old man scratch his ears. "You're a good kid," Arthur said one morning. He was looking out the window at my house across the street. "Most people would have sold that place and run. You stayed and cleaned it out. It's a good house, Arthur. Just needed better air in it." He died in his sleep 3 days later. He didn't have much. No kids, no ex-wives, just a sister in Arizona he hadn't talked to in 20 years. He left the house to her, and she put it on the market within a week. The day the for sale sign went up, I felt a pang of worry. I didn't want some corporate jerk or a noisy family moving in and ruining the quiet. But then, I saw Sarah looking at the sign while we were walking Barnaby. "It's a nice place," she said, her eyes tracing the roofline I'd paid to fix. "Needs some work inside, but the bones are solid." I looked at her, really looked at her. She was wearing my old work hoodie, her hair in a messy knot, looking at Arthur's house like it was a gold mine. "You think we could make it work?" I asked. "I think we've already made the hard stuff work," she replied. "We bought Arthur's house. We didn't sell mine. I turned my old house into a rental property specifically for guys starting over, guys who needed a break and a place that was safe. I keep the rent low and the standards high. Living in Arthur's house feels right. I sit on the porch in the evenings, in the same spot he used to sit. I watch the sunset hit the oak tree across the street. The tree looks different from this angle. It looks taller. I'm not the same man who plugged that USB drive into the TV. That man was fueled by a fire that nearly burned him alive. Today, I'm just a guy who knows the value of a clear conscience and a quiet street. I still have the USB drive in the safe, but I've forgotten the code. And honestly, I don't think I'll ever bother trying to remember it. The story is over, the credits have rolled, and for the first time in my life, I'm actually looking forward to the sequel. Buying Arthur's place was the final cleansing. It felt like moving from a crime scene into a sanctuary. Sarah and I spent the first 6 months tearing up the old nicotine-stained wallpaper and replacing the creaky floorboards. Every nail I pulled out felt like I was extracting a splinter from my own skin. One Saturday, while I was up in the attic of Arthur's old place, I found a small, dusty box tucked behind a chimney flue. Inside wasn't money or jewelry. It was a stack of Polaroids. Arthur had been a hobbyist photographer back in the day. There were shots of the neighborhood from the 80s old cars, kids on bikes, the oak tree across the street when it was barely a sapling. But at the bottom of the stack, there was a single, recent photo. It was a shot of me, taken from Arthur's porch about a week before the barbecue. I was standing in my driveway, looking up at the sky with a look of absolute crushing exhaustion. On the back, in his shaky handwriting, Arthur had written, "Hold on, kid, the wind is shifting." I sat there in the dust and cried. Not for Lauren, not for the betrayal, but for the fact that this old man had been rooting for me when I didn't even have the strength to root for myself. I framed that photo and put it on the mantle. The rental house, my old house, became a success in a way I didn't expect. My first tenant was a guy named Mark. He'd lost his job and his family in a messy divorce and was sleeping in his car. I didn't just give him a key, I gave him a chance. We spent a few nights on the porch talking. I didn't tell him my whole story, but he knew enough to know I wasn't judging him. Seeing the lights on in that house and knowing someone was finding their feet again made the memories of the silver Mercedes finally stop feeling like an open wound. It was just a scar now. Sarah and I got married on a quiet Saturday in October. No big production, no company barbecue. We did it in the backyard of the new house, right under the view of that oak tree. Rick from the plant was there, some guys from the floor, and of course, Barnaby, who wore a bow tie and tried to eat the cake. About 2 years after we moved in, I was at the local library, of all places. places. I was looking for a book on woodworking when I saw a woman shelving books in the back corner. She looked thin, her skin sallow, her eyes darting around like she was waiting to be yelled at. It was Lauren. She didn't see me. She was wearing a cheap vest with a name tag and sensible shoes. She looked like a shadow. I stood there for a long moment, watching her. I realized that the monster I had feared, the woman who had shattered my world, was just a small, unhappy person who had made a series of terrible bets and lost every single one of them. I didn't say hello. I didn't need to. I just turned around and walked out into the sunshine. I'm 42 now. My hands are more callous than they've ever been, and I have a few more gray hairs around my temples. Sarah is pregnant with our first A-girl. We've already picked out the name. We're calling her Ruth, after Arthur's mother. Sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet and the wind is rustling through the oak tree across the street, I think about that USB drive. I think about the moment I hit play and the world went silent. It was a moment of pure, unfiltered justice, but the real justice didn't come from the screen. It came from the years of quiet, honest work that followed. I finally changed the code on the safe where the drive is kept. The new code is the date I met Sarah. I don't think I'll ever open it to look at the video. I'll probably just use it to store Ruth's birth certificate and the deed to the houses. I'm not a man who lives in the dark anymore. I don't need night vision to see who's coming. I know exactly who belongs in my life, and I know that as long as I keep the lights on and the truth close, the shadows don't stand a chance. I walked out onto the porch tonight, leaned against the railing, and looked at the stars. Across the street, the lights in my old house were warm and steady. Mark was probably watching TV. My own house was glowing behind me. I took a deep breath of the cool night air and smiled. The years turned into a blur of the best kind of normalcy. Ruth was born on a Tuesday, screaming her lungs out, and the moment I held her, the last of the poison from the old life finally evaporated. When you're holding 7 pounds of new life, there's no room left in your heart for a regional director in a silver Mercedes or a woman who lied about footsteps on the porch. I took 2 weeks off from the plant. Marcus, the boss who actually had a soul, sent a massive gift basket and a note telling me not to even look at my email. I spent those 14 days in a haze of diapers, late-night feedings, and the quiet realization that I was finally a part of something that wasn't built on a foundation of sand. One afternoon, when Ruth was about 6 months old, I was pushed into a situation I hadn't prepared for. I was at the hardware store picking up some weather stripping when a woman stepped out of the aisle right in front of me. It was Claire. She looked different. The wealthy wife armor was gone. She was dressed in jeans and a simple sweater, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked younger, more relaxed. We stood there between the power drills and the lumber, two people who had shared the worst night of our lives in a crowded backyard. "Joe," she said, nodding. Her smile was small but genuine. "Claire, how've you been?" "I'm good." "Really good," she said. She told me she'd sold the estate. She'd moved into a smaller place closer to her sister and started a nonprofit that helped women in domestic transition. "And him?" I asked, though I didn't really want to know. "He's still trying to sue for a piece of the inheritance," she said, rolling her eyes. "My father's lawyers keep him tied up in knots just for the sport of it. He's working at a car wash in a different county now. Apparently, nobody wants to hire a manager who's famous on the local subreddits." We stood there for a second in the shared silence of survivors. "I never thanked you properly," she said, her voice dropping a register, "for the footage, for the honesty. Everyone else at that barbecue would have looked the other way to keep their bonuses. You didn't." "I didn't do it for the company," I admitted. "I know," she said, "but you did it. That's what matters." We shook hands and went our separate ways. It was the final bit of closure I didn't know I needed a handshake with the only other person who knew exactly how high the stakes had been that Saturday by the pool. When I got home, I found Sarah in the kitchen, teaching Ruth how to make a mess with mashed carrots. Barnaby was under the high chair, acting as the cleanup crew. I sat down at the table and watched them. I eventually sold the rental house. Mark, the guy who had been living there, got back on his feet and landed a steady job as a mechanic. I sold it to him for what I owed on the mortgage, plus a little extra for Ruth's college fund. He cried when we signed the papers. He's a good man, and he's taking care of the place. He even keeps the oak tree trimmed. I'm 50 now. The plant is still running, and I'm the warehouse manager. Sarah and I have a second kid, a boy named Leo, who has the same stubborn streak I do. We still live in Arthur's house. I never did take down that photo on the mantle, the one of me looking exhausted in my old driveway. I keep it there to remind me that even when you're at your lowest, the wind can shift. Sometimes, when I'm cleaning out the safe to make room for the kids' school records or Sarah's grandmother's jewelry, I see that USB drive. It's a cheap piece of plastic, scratched and outdated. I thought about throwing it away, but I haven't. It's not a trophy. It's a receipt. It's proof that the truth is a debt that always gets paid, one way or another. The oak tree across the street is huge now. Its branches hang low over the sidewalk, shading the spot where a silver Mercedes once sat. Every now and then, I see a car pull into that driveway, Mark's truck, or a friend visiting him, and I don't feel a single flicker of anxiety. I just see a driveway. I just see a house. I walked out onto the porch tonight after the kids were asleep. The air was cool, smelling of rain and cut grass. I sat in Arthur's old rocking chair and let the wood creak under my weight. I looked at the dark windows of the house I used to live in and the bright, warm windows of the house I live in now. I'm not a man looking for proof anymore. I'm not a man waiting for a scream in the night. I'm just a man who's earned his peace. And as the stars came out over the neighborhood, I realized that I didn't just make everyone speechless that day at the barbecue. The years have a way of filing down the sharp edges of a memory until you can run your hand over it without getting cut. I'm nearing 60 now. My joints ache when the rain rolls in over the valley, and the manufacturing plant is a place I only visit for retirement luncheons. I stepped down 3 years ago. They gave me a gold watch that I never wear and a plaque that sits in a box in the garage. Sarah and I spend our mornings on the porch of Arthur's old house. We've painted it a soft, welcoming cream color, and the garden is full of the same marigolds Arthur used to love. Ruth is in medical school now, and Leo followed Sarah's lead, working as a heavy-duty mechanic for the city. They're good kids. They're honest kids. That was the only rule in our house. Tell the truth, even when it's ugly, especially when it's ugly. The old house, the one where it all happened, has changed hands a couple of times since Mark moved on to a bigger place for his growing family. A young couple lives there now. They have a toddler and a golden retriever that barks at the squirrels in the oak tree. Sometimes I see the husband out there at 6 a.m., nursing a cup of coffee and looking at the world with that dazed, tired expression of a new father. I always give him a wave. He has no idea that the ground he's standing on was once a battlefield. A few months ago, I got a letter with no return address. It was postmarked from a town 2 states over. Inside was a funeral program. Lauren had passed away. It wasn't a car accident or anything dramatic. The letter, written by her mother, said it was a long illness that had finally taken its toll. There were no photos in the program, just a list of her survivors and a short poem about finding peace. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, holding that piece of paper. I thought I would feel something satisfaction, or maybe a final surge of that old bitter grief. Instead, I just felt a quiet, heavy stillness. I thought about the girl I'd married, the one who loved silk robes and had a laugh that could fill a room before it turned into a weapon. I hoped that in those final years, she'd found a version of the truth truth she could live with. I didn't go to the funeral. That chapter hadn't just been closed. The book had been pulped years ago. I did, however, finally take the USB drive out of the safe. I took it down to the basement where I have my woodworking bench. I laid it on the anvil I use for hammered hardware. I looked at it for a minute, this tiny, insignificant piece of plastic that had redirected the lives of a dozen people. It looked like junk. In the end, that's all it was. It wasn't my identity. It wasn't my legacy. It was just a tool I'd used to cut out a cancer. I picked up my heavy shop hammer. One swing was all it took. The casing shattered, the memory chip inside snapped in two, and the presentation I'd given all those years ago was reduced to dust and shards. I swept it into the palm of my hand and walked out to the backyard. I didn't bury it. I didn't make a ceremony of it. I just tossed it into the trash can next to the lawnmower. That night, Sarah found me standing by the fence, looking up at the oak tree. It's a massive thing now, its roots probably reaching all the way under the street. You okay, Joe? She asked, slipping her hand into mine. Her skin is weathered now, but her grip is still the strongest thing I know. Yeah? I said, and for the first time, I meant it in a way that had nothing to do with the past. I'm just thinking about how big that tree got. It had a lot of history to grow over, she said. We walked back into Arthur's house together. I locked the front door not because I was afraid of who was outside, but because I wanted to keep the warmth inside. I turned off the porch light and headed up the stairs. The silence in the house wasn't deafening. It wasn't a void. It was full of the sound of the house settling, the distant hum of the refrigerator, and the steady breathing of a life well lived. I'm not the hero of a story anymore. I'm just a man who stood his ground when the world tried to shift it. I closed my eyes and went to sleep. I didn't need to watch the gate. I didn't need to check the porch. I was home, and the truth was right where it belonged, in the light, where it could never hurt me again. The legacy of that night finally trickled down into the quietest parts of my life. I'm 70 now. The manufacturing plant is a memory of steel and noise, and my days are measured in the growth of the garden and the visits from my grandkids. Ruth's eldest, a boy named Arthur, likes to climb that old oak tree across the street when the neighbors aren't looking. I watch him from the porch, and I don't tell him to get down. I just tell him to hold on tight. Sarah passed away 3 years ago. It was a Tuesday, the same day of the week I'd first seen that silver Mercedes. But this Tuesday didn't feel like a betrayal. It felt like a sunset. She went peacefully in our bed, holding my hand, and her last words weren't about the past or the drama. She just told me I'd done a good job. After she was gone, the house felt too big. I spent a lot of time sitting in Arthur's old rocking chair, looking at the mantel. The photo of me from 40 years ago, the exhausted man in the driveway, was still there. I realized I didn't recognize him anymore. That man was a stranger defined by what had been taken from him. I am a man defined by what I built after the ruins. I finally decided to sell both houses. It was time for someone else to grow their roots here. I didn't need the physical space to remember the life we'd lived. While I was packing up the attic in Arthur's house, I found a small locked metal box that I'd somehow missed all those years. I had to use a crowbar to get it open. Inside wasn't money or secrets. It was a collection of letters Arthur had written but never sent. Most were to his sister, but there was one envelope with my name on it. It was dated the day after the barbecue. Joe, it read, I watched you walk out of that yard yesterday. I saw the look on your face. You think you just destroyed your life, but you didn't. You just cleared the lot. Most men spend their whole lives living in a house full of rot because they're too scared to swing the hammer. You swung it. Now, build something that won't burn. I folded the letter and put it in my wallet. I moved into a small apartment near the coast, closer to Ruth and the kids. I don't have a safe anymore. I don't have a trail camera. I don't even have the photo from the mantle. I left it for the new owners of Arthur's house, tucked into the frame of the kitchen window with a note. This house was built on the truth. Keep it that way. A few weeks ago, I was sitting on a bench at the boardwalk, watching the waves. A man about my age sat down next to me. He looked tired, his suit a little frayed at the cuffs. We started talking about nothing, the weather, the price of coffee, the way the world was changing. I used to be someone important, the man said, looking out at the water. I had a big job, a big house, lost it all because of one mistake. I looked at him. I looked at the way his hands shook slightly when he reached for his drink. For a split second, I wondered if it was him, David, but it wasn't. It was just another man who had built his life on sand and was surprised when the tide came in. It wasn't the mistake that lost it, I said, my voice steady and quiet. It was the lie you told to keep it. The man looked at me, confused, then turned back to the ocean. I didn't explain. I didn't need to. I stood up, brushed the sand off my coat, and started walking toward my daughter's house for dinner. I'm an old man now, and my story is almost done. But as I walk, I feel the weight of every choice I made. I think about that USB drive, the shattered glass of Claire's wine, and the deafening silence of a backyard full of people who finally saw the truth. I didn't just make them speechless. I found my own voice, and in the end, that was the only thing that ever mattered. The wind is shifting again, but this time, I'm not bracing for the storm. I'm just enjoying the breeze. The apartment by the coast is small, but it has a balcony that faces the east. I wake up before the sun now, not because of a night shift or a sense of dread, but because I don't want to miss the way the light hits the water. It's a clean, honest kind of light. My grandson, Arthur, came over last weekend. He's 20 now, tall and lean, with a jawline that reminds me of the man I used to see in the mirror. He's at university studying law, and he likes to sit on my balcony and ask me about the old days. He's grown up in a world of digital footprints and instant cloud uploads. To him, the idea of a physical USB drive and a hidden trail camera sounds like a spy movie from a different century. Do you ever regret it, Grandpa? He asked me, leaning his elbows on the railing, the way you did it, making it so public. Cla, cla. I looked at my hands. They're spotted with age and the skin is thin, but they don't shake. No, I said. If I had pulled David into a private office, he would have lied. He would have manipulated HR. He would have turned it on me and fired me before the sun came up. Sometimes, the only way to kill a shadow is to turn on every light in the house at once. It wasn't about the spectacle. It was about making the truth undeniable. He nodded, looking out at the surf. I think that's why I want to be a prosecutor. I like the idea of the evidence being the only thing that matters. Just remember, Artie, I told him. Evidence is just data. Character is what you do with it. Don't ever use the truth as a weapon unless you're willing to live with the wreckage. I don't think about Lauren much anymore, but when I do, I don't feel that old sharp spike of betrayal. I think about her like a character in a book I read a long time ago. She was a woman who was so afraid of being ordinary that she became something much worse. I heard from Mark, the guy who bought my first house, that she's buried in the town cemetery, in a plot her mother bought. I thought about visiting once, just to leave a marigold, but I realized I didn't owe her a goodbye. I gave her that 30 years ago when I walked out the side gate of David's estate. I'm 84 now. My world has shrunk to this apartment, the boardwalk, and the Sunday dinners at Ruth's house. I'm okay with that. I've spent enough of my life looking over my shoulder and guarding the perimeter. Last night, I had a dream. I was back in that backyard. The pool was shimmering, and the grill was smoking. Everyone was there. David, Claire, Lauren, even Arthur from across the street. But in the dream, I didn't have a USB drive. I didn't have a microphone. I just walked through the crowd, and nobody saw me. I wasn't the USB guy. I wasn't the victim. I was just a man man walking through a party, headed for the exit. I woke up feeling incredibly light. I got out of bed, made a cup of coffee, and sat on my balcony. The sun began to creep over the horizon, turning the gray Atlantic into a sheet of hammered gold. I thought about that trail camera, long since rotted away in some landfill. I thought about the silence of that backyard, and I thought about the life I built in the decades that followed. I've had a good run. I loved a woman who loved me back for real. I raised children who know how to look people in the eye. I helped a few men find their footing when they were sliding into the dark. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small, worn stone I keep there. It's just a pebble I picked up from the driveway of Arthur's house the day I moved out. It's smooth from years of me rubbing it between my thumb and forefinger. It's a piece of the ground I chose to stand on. The world is loud now, full of people screaming their versions of the truth at each other. But I know a secret that most of them haven't learned yet. The truth doesn't need to scream. It doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to stay standing when everything else falls down. I took a sip of my coffee and watched the tide come in. It's a beautiful morning, and for the first time in my very long life, I don't have anything else to say. The morning air on the balcony is getting colder, or maybe my blood is just getting thinner. It doesn't matter much. I've reached the age where the days don't feel like a race anymore. They feel like a gift I've already unwrapped. Ruth came by today with a box of old things she'd found while cleaning out her garage. Among the baby clothes and old school projects, there was a small framed photo I hadn't seen in years. It wasn't the one from the mantle. It was a candid shot Sarah had taken of me and Arthur, the original Arthur, sitting on his porch about a year before he died. We were both laughing at something, probably one of his terrible jokes about the local council. I looked at that photo and realized that the man in the picture was finally at peace. The anger was gone. The vigilance was gone. I was just a neighbor sitting with a friend. "You're smiling," Ruth said, setting a plate of cookies on the small bistro table. "I'm just remembering Arthur," I said. "He was a good man. He saw the world for exactly what it was, and he didn't apologize for it." "You're a lot like him, Dad," she told me, kissing the top of my head. "I suppose I am. I spent a long time being the man who held the mirror up to everyone else's secrets, but in the end, the only person I really had to be honest with was myself. I had to admit that I loved the power of that moment at the barbecue, but I also had to admit that the power was a poison if I held on to it. I'm 87 now. My breath comes a little shorter, and the walk to the boardwalk takes twice as long as it used to. I've started giving away my books and the few pieces of furniture I have left. I want to leave this world as light as I entered it. I think about the manufacturing plant, sometimes the smell of hot oil, the clatter of the assembly line, the way the light used to filter through the high windows. It's probably all automated now, run by machines that don't care about regional directors or workplace safety presentations. That world is gone. David is gone. Lauren is gone. The only things left are the stories we leave behind and the people who knew us. I look at Ruth, a doctor who heals people. I think of Leo, who fixes the machines that keep the city running. I think of my grandson, Arthur, who wants to fight for the truth in a courtroom. That's the real long-form expansion of my life. That's the payoff. I sat out on the balcony late tonight, long after the sun had gone down. The ocean was a vast, black heartbeat under a crescent moon. I thought about that trail camera one last time. I thought about the grainy, night vision image of a man in a silver Mercedes and a woman in a silk robe. It felt so small, so incredibly small. I stood up, gripping the railing for balance, and looked out at the dark water. I realized that I wasn't waiting for the wind to shift anymore. I was the wind. I was part of the steady, quiet rhythm of the world. I went inside, pulled the sliding glass door shut, and locked it. I didn't do it out of habit or fear. I did it because it was time to rest. I climbed into bed, pulled the blankets up to my chin, and watched the shadows of the clouds drift across the ceiling. There are no more secrets. There are no more lies. There is just the quiet. During the mandatory company barbecue, I plugged a USB drive into my boss's smart TV and made everyone speechless. It was the loudest thing I ever did. But the life I lived after I walked out of that yard, that was the masterpiece.